Today, my guest is Professor Charles Dhanaraj. I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Charles as a person, Professor Dhanaraj as a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I will skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Charles is a fellow of the AIB, and he was the vice president of the, uh, the group. He has served at various editorial positions and editorial boards of Cross-Cultural and Strategic Management, SMJ, JIBS, Leadership Quarterly, Management International Review. In addition to many publications in top journals, he has written over 50 teaching cases, several of which have received international awards. Thank you, Charles, for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure, Erican. Wonderful stuff you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks. First question about you as a person. What did you want to become when you were a child?
Good question to start with. You would be surprised. Teaching was the last thing in my mind, honestly, right? I remember telling somebody, what do you want to become? Anything but a teacher, right? And I was brought up in a very strong Catholic family, and my early days, the only dream I had was to become a Catholic priest, and that was the ultimate for me. But I finished my high school and went for what I call the pre-university level, and suddenly everything vanished, and it was a very different world altogether. So after I started getting into college, I liked technology. I liked international. In fact, one of my interests was to go to Japan and learn automation because my engineering undergraduate I did on automation and mechanics, what's that called? CNC technology, computer numerical control technology. So that I got what I called, I was applying for a Hitachi scholarship, which gave you funding to go to Japan. And someone in the last stage of the application mentioned that means you have to come back and become a teacher for 2 years.
Hmm.
Then I dropped the whole plan. I said, no, I have three sisters in my family who are teachers, and I don't want to be a teacher, period. And strangely, I got into Tata for a job, and they sent me to Japan, and I learned CNC control and came back and taught my colleagues and stuff. So it took me a long time to recognize that was my calling. In fact, strangely, it was when I was teaching in a polytechnic in Singapore, Temasek Poly, which I thought was going to be a 6-month job. It turned out to be my, what I call, where I discovered my calling to be a teacher. So I enjoyed teaching, and I suddenly realized like you can fire up students' imagination in a classroom. So it was teaching that brought me to recognize teaching. In fact, my first introduction was a class in international business. In fact, I was hired in the Polytechnic to teach two courses, control engineering, which was using C language at that time, and another course on the business of organization. Basically, it was an introduction to management course.
Hmm.
And in the process, somebody in the business, this was taught in a school of IT, School of Information Technology in Temasek Poly. And someone in the business school approached me, hey, can you help me to run a simulation in international business? It was at that time, Intopia was a top favored simulation at the time, which was developed by Hans Thrali. So I said, sure. I liked simulation because I wrote a simulation myself to teach my 16-year-olds what business organizations are. So I got introduced to Intopia, and at that time, I'm talking about 1991, when Intopia was a DOS-based software, right?
Hmm.
And at that time, Windows was a popular thing at the time. And I said, this is not right. We can't be running a DOS-based simulation in Singapore, which was like a big place. So I wrote to Hans Thrali. Hans Thrali at that time was a professor in international business in Indiana University. So he promptly responded. He said, if you are willing to help me, we can make it into Windows version. So that's what got me into international business. So I had a team of three of my students who were in my IT program joined with me, and we wrote basically a Visual Basic program to run Intopia on a Windows platform. And I discovered international business in the process. So
Fascinating.
yeah, actually before that it was like in MBA I was at Wilfrid Laurier, and I wanted to do a course on joint ventures. Like, when I was working in Tata's, one of the big thing I had was to manage a joint venture with a German company. And we were making load haul dumpers. It's one of the mining trucks. And my role as an executive assistant to vice president was to engage with these German partners for manufacturing. We were making a huge machinery, basically. And I remember there was one small pin. I think, Arikan, you know the engineering. So there is a German standards called DIN, D-I-N. And that required a particular composition of the material, which was not available in India. So we wanted to replace it with another material. And we had to go through these negotiations back and forth between Germans and the Indian party. So to some extent, I was fired up about partnership. So when I went to MBA, I said I want to understand partnerships a little more. And I thought I was becoming an entrepreneur and I needed to understand partnerships. So that was my motivation at that time. There was a professor, Hugh Munro. He said, well, there is one guy who understands international partnerships. He's called Paul Beamish. Here is a book he wrote. Why don't you read it up and then do a study? So I wrote an independent study on international joint ventures, little to recognize that eventually it will become my passion. So anyway, all through this years, like everybody, like when I was in engineering, I did my master's in engineering in robotics. I finished that and I was asked to teach a class in robotics for master students. And that is unheard of, like a master student teaching masters. And and I said, okay, sure, why not? And I taught that class. I think it was three students. It's a very small number game, right? And the prof asked me, hey, do you want to do PhD in robotics? I said, that means I become a professor, right? Yeah, no, I don't want to do. So even then I was like resisting. Even when I was doing an MBA, one of the prof walks up after the marketing class. The questions you are asking, you should think about a PhD. I said, no, sir, I want to become an entrepreneur. So I resisted it for a long time, but it was Singapore which really consolidated this calling. And this is 1992. I made a choice to become a professor. Went to Ivey, and I don't regret it at all. It has been a delight.
Yeah, there's this book, The Alchemist by Paula
Yes.
Coelho.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, some people don't listen to or watch their signs, and maybe yours is a case in point. It was
Yeah. It is.
destined to be this way. Very
Yeah, you
interesting.
discover calling, and I think this is what I really wanted to. In fact, when I became a professor and dealing with doctoral students, I still remember one moment as a doctoral student in the final year. I'm attending this AIB doctoral consortium. Somewhere this is 1999, and opening act was by Chris Bartlett. And I remember him walking into this, and we are all like early morning. It's 8:30. You know how the doctoral consortiums work, and we are all like what you call eager-faced and looking forward to this mythical figure, Chris Bartlett. Who we have adored as a god, and he walks in, and then for 30 seconds, Ilgas, that he didn't speak. He was like, I mean, it looked like a long time, and he was like staring at each of us and going like this. And and then he says, I don't know why so many of you want to join this profession where I know 50% of these people are very unhappy. I mean, that was like a downer in the morning. I mean, here it's like you're all the IMT consortium supposed to launch, and then the quintessential Professor Bartlett comes in and says, why are you coming into my profession? 50% of the people are unhappy, right? But then, guys, what really carved out at that point. What made it a memorable experience was when he finished. By that time, he left one statement. He said, "Don't ever let your passion killed by your institution." And I hope you will ignite your institution with your passion. So that I have held on to it, and I think that was my sort of a moment I still remember early. I mean, that was probably the best advice I have received, and I've held on to it all along.
This is something that we should put on the door in the office. If we ever get to the office after the pandemic, this is right. So, if you stop doing what you're doing today, what is the second best alternative career path? For a person
Ah,
who wouldn't get into the teaching, you became a great teacher. For a person who wouldn't do research, you became a great researcher. What's the thing that you would not do ever in your life? So we'll see that if it's going to happen.
yeah, no, that's a good question. In fact, Paul, who was my advisor, has become a good friend and almost like a brother to me now. He used to say, "The curse of the gifted is the multiplicity of choices. The curse of the gifted is the multiplicity of choices." And to a large extent, it is true. And I've used it actually, and I've shared it with multiple people on this. That's the problem. I mean, I can teach well, I can write well, and I can manage well. And sometimes it's always like, what am I doing? And then you fritter your energy in multiple places, and you don't. But over the period, what I've recognized is the most the most valuable thing I find myself enjoying is writing. And at the same time, the hardest work I find to do is also writing. Right? I can go teach. It's enjoyable. There's a lots of immediate feedback to you, and so you enjoy teaching. You enjoy getting things done, organizing conferences, organizing meetings. But the writing part was the one that you realize that your heart longs for it. At the same time, your whole systems resist sitting down and focusing and getting things done. And that's what I've learned how to overcome some of that and stay put. If I had to leave my professorial job, I probably will sit down on an island with a pen and paper and write to my
Mhm.
heart's content.
Um, let's talk about regrets. What is one thing you wish you would have done but you didn't?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. We have moved a lot of places, and I think we left India and then we went to Canada, then engineering, then went. In fact, I've lost count. This is probably the 20th home I'm living in, right? And that puts a lot of stress on the family and stuff. So sometimes I think, could I have done a better thing? But at the same time, when I look back, none of those experiences I would trade for uh, nothing. I mean, trade for something else. So it has been a difficult, but then I find it's enjoyable. I'm not sure to go back and regret. Lots of challenging circumstances. Sometimes I wish I could have started less number of projects and accomplished more, but I tend to thrive on variety, so that has been a part of it. So could I have been? I mean, one regret is probably, could I have been more focused? Definitely, and yes, I could have done more with doing less. So that's probably a good reflection from my past.
Thank you. If you were stranded in a small village you seek refuge in a cafe, bar, and people are asking you, like, what's your research? Why is it important? What's your contribution to society? What do you say? How do you explain your research to a layman?
I mean, to a layman, I would say, I mean, probably even to a professional, I could say, I try to understand relationships. Relationships. I mean, we can call it partnerships, you can call it collaborations, you can call it joint ventures, you can call it networks. So my focus is, how do relationships evolve? why do certain relationships endure, and why do certain relationships create value, and why do some certain relationships become a drain on the system, right? So those are my broad questions, and I embed it in a broader context of organizations. The same way you and I can relate, organizations relate, and that's what we call organizational relationships. And when it is put in a legal context, it becomes a joint venture. And when it is across the country, we call it international joint venture. So we talk about this entity called international joint ventures. That's where I started my PhD work. And my goal was, why do these joint ventures last, or why do they disappear? In fact, the way I came to the topic was I vividly remember that the time, I mean, we had a doctoral lounge with a round table, and there was a Financial Times magazine on the table. And I'm reading Bruce Coget's opinion piece or an article on joint ventures are so fragile. And he's quoting data about 3.5 years as the life cycle. And I'm just sitting there as a doctoral student. I'm just dabbling with the data set that Paul had put together. And I'm reading Japanese joint ventures, 100-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old. I said, something is not right here, right? So we have to understand what it is about relationships or joint ventures. And that's what got me into the game. And as I moved on, it became from joint ventures to learning and other stuff. I can talk about it. Yeah.
Thank you. What are some of the omitted variables or untouched or underutilized areas in IB research?
I think we are, see, international business is a moving, a living entity, right? I think um, the world is not static. We are, the world is getting connected more and more, right? And in fact, let me touch on two or three things. One, in fact, you remember, Ilgas, the Time had a cover piece just before the onset of COVID, the end of globalization, right? And basically, they were citing the FDI is falling, the what do you call the the exports are shrinking, and all the standard parameters on which we used to measure international business was falling. And they cited it as, is it the end of globalization? Sure enough, there was a lot of like, well, you are familiar with this nationalism, that the whole stream of research that's being done. So we see a lot of nationalism. We see the falling of international product stuff. But then what I am seeing is, digitalization has fundamentally changed the way we do business, right? I think we had a piece in JIPS last year about the whole idea of digital internalization or digital globalization. And fundamentally, you cannot measure globalization in static terms. What I used to do is, if I can give an example, I used to make a product. I used to make a shirt, and I send it by ship to another country. Today, I send my data to another country, and I have a partner in another country who can make it. And suddenly, you don't have a shipment. You don't have data on there is no what you call a basic manufacturing setup in a foreign country and all that. But then what we are seeing is the data. So in a sense, what you used to measure in terms of dollars and product flow and all that is now shifting slowly to data movement. And that we have not understood. So the digital globalization is a piece that we want to understand better and better. And if you take that in a little bit, in fact, we have a paper we call Paradox of Digital Globalization. Paradox because one normally thinks, oh, you know what? I create an app, I put it, anybody in the world can use it, right? Sure enough, right? So we find knowledge transferability is becoming easy to do. But then making money out of the app, that's a different story, right? So it's not as easy as you think. So that's one part we are looking at it. And the third issue that I find in international business, which is promising now, is we never thought about systems. In fact, we always thought about firms. In fact, I remember talking to many of my real good mentors. In fact, I remember Professor Alan Rugman telling me, like, the study of international business is the study of multinational enterprises. So in essence, we almost uh, focused solely on the firm level understanding. Right? Now we recognize that firm action or globalization is not exogenous. Firm actions dictate how globalization shapes. If firms become selfish and only for their own benefits, the globalization will shrink, and that's what we are seeing. So now my interest would be to see a globalization with a face. What I challenge is globalization is not coming to an end. What we are seeing is an onslaught of the globalization 4.0, if I can take piggyback between Pankaj Gemawat's globalization 3.0. So we are going to see globalization in a digital world, but globalization with a human face. Globalization that does not destroy the individual identity. In fact, I like what you are doing in nationalism, because to me, like, this is going to be a part and parcel of the new regime we are getting into, where there will be space for your national identity, and where you cannot, but in order to survive and thrive, you need to collaborate in the global domain.
True. Um, what do you see in the next, what is the advice for studying in the next 5 to 10 years in the field? For a junior faculty, for a PhD student, where do you see the field evolve into?
Yeah, and I think the field does not evolve. The field gets moved by the actors that are in the field, right? So that's my challenge to our the new generation. I mean, three things. One is follow your passion. I mean, to some extent, probably I'm on the extreme end. Like, I let passion to drive my everything what I do, and if I'm not interested, I drop the ball and move on. I think you have to discover what you are passionate about, and not too much worried about how do I make this four A's and five A's and six A's. I think one's research has to be driven by real passion. And number two, you need to be engaged with the real world. To some extent, it is nice to bring somebody with a PhD, lock them up, and then tell them, okay, 6 years later, we will meet you and decide whether to give you tenure or not. And that seems to have get some credence in the last few years, or last decade or 2 decades. But I think it has lost the gravitas of research. Now we are increasingly finding exotic research, but of no use to anybody, right? We write in sophisticated journals. Even the authors who write don't read it again because it's not of much value. So I think we are looking for more credible problems, more impactful insights coming out of research, because scholarship draws a good array of bright minds. So to that extent, I mean, I use the word, to him that is given more is expected of. So I think when we have been endowed with much more brain power, we need to be committing that brain power to solving important and real problems. And that should happen. And I think we are seeing the move. I think grand challenges that JIPS editor Elaine Webeke has pushing forward. We see some good directions, but I think it is going to fundamentally call for rethinking our institutional values, what we value for promotion, tenure, and stuff. So, so engagement is critical. And the third is being connected. I think research is not a solo enterprise. Strangely, I don't think I have written anything without a partner. So you need to recognize that research is a social enterprise. You come out with good research when you are able to partner. So your ability to work with people, your ability to communicate and connect with people is important, and that's what really can create valuable scholarship, because the more the complex problems we are solving, the more, what do you call, the knowledge bases we have to draw from will be quite varied, and you cannot be master of all, so you have to draw from multiple resources, and that's why partnerships are important.
Uh, I mean, you've seen many junior faculty, many PhD students in your career. What are the top mistakes that they do that people should
Yeah,
avoid?
I mean, one is the fad of the day. I think we all like to, what if today is blockchain, I want to run into blockchain. And then tomorrow, if something else, I want to go into it. I think one is just because if you keep on running after the fads, you don't build momentum, you don't build mass. So stay true to your passion, and sometimes your passion means you take this, what I call, some of the boring activities, in the sense staying through, tenaciously following what you have started, and building it up, because it takes time before an idea becomes an actionable or doable insight. So staying with it and working with that, so that's something I find very few people are interested or committed to doing. I mean, you need to build tenacity. Tenacity is critical for us to become impactful scholar, and that means uh, willingness to sit with some failures. Journals may reject your idea, but then you sort of stay with it and learn through it. Right? And two is listening to advice. I think feedback is a, to me, I would think it's an lost art in our academic business. We have not developed a good mechanism for giving feedback nor to receive feedback. Right. I go back in my early days. I still remember I was a newly minted assistant professor in Indiana University, almost reaching my third year review deadline, and I had no papers accepted, and my attention was being drifted in multiple areas. I remember the dean walking into my office. No, I'm not going and meeting the dean. The dean is walking into my office, closes the door, sits down. He was John Hassel, his name, and he's asking me, Charles, how are you doing? Your third year review will come in another 4 or 5 months soon. And I'm like going, oh, I'm here. This is there. This is there. Like I give him a litany of the papers that I am thinking of, everything from my imagination stage to what's in the review stage. And then John pushes me to, no, no, tell me your top three, number one, number two, number three. I had a hard time to come up with that. And he said that, no, you have to come up with that. So narrow your choices, focus, and get it done, right? And in fact, in return, he was gracious enough. He said, okay, why don't I give you a break in teaching for the next fall and focus on writing and get it through, so that when you go for your third year review, you are in a good stage, right? I mean, that particular intervention was helpful to me, and I did take the advice. So, first of all, to get that advice in your face, right? That's not given. Quite often, people speak to you gently and nice. Nobody wants to hurt you, and just, oh, they're doing great stuff, but nobody speaks to you at what you need to hear. And that's important for our academic world to get in. And number two is not only giving the feedback, we have to train ourselves, the new graduates, willingness to listen to feedback. And sometimes you may have great ideas. You don't need, I mean, you'll have lots of feedback, but you don't need to take everything, right? In fact, in my tenure letter, my uh, the another dean who wrote it, in fact, he wrote it in the letter. He said, Charles did not listen to my advice, but that has not hurt him badly. Basically, he wanted me not to write cases, right? He would tell me, don't write cases, that's a distraction. But I used to tell him, writing cases gives me new insights about a phenomena. And basically, for example, in my case, right, you mentioned about the case writing and stuff, joint venture case on Eli Lilly. when we started it was a case, and that got me an access into the company, and that got me an access to understand alliances. We had a National Science Foundation research grant that came out of it, and an AMR piece and an AMJ piece, all that came out, which was basically the case was the pilot project for us. So in a sense, you don't need to listen to all the advice, but learn how to distinguish and take what matters and build it up. So that would be my one key message for the doctoral
Thank you.
students.
We're running out of time. What is one question that I should have asked you but didn't?
Man, you did a great job. You have done you have done a fantastic. I think one of the best interviews. I think now. I think you have discovered your talent, Ilgas. You are a good interviewer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. This was very candid. I learned a lot. It will help me. It will help me, my future, my career, and my sanity, hopefully, with the institution that I'm in. Thank you so much for your help. This was great.
No, my pleasure. My pleasure, Ilgas. I think if you are listening, as anybody who's listening, I think life takes its own turns. You can't write a script. You follow as life happens. You make the best out of it.
Thank
If
you.
life gives you lemons, make lemonade.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. My pleasure, Ilgas.